I don't know if we're going to have anything to talk about here this morning, gentlemen, but
what's going on today?
You been to bed yet?
It's great weather.
Yeah, okay, yeah, for February, of course. We do have Jeff Link, Craig Robinson. They are here. Democrat, Republican, party scoopers in the House. Caucus, really, do you consider it over, Jeff Link, or is it still ongoing process?
Where do we start?
You know what's funny? I'm so old, I worked for Al Gore in 2000. We thought election night would be the end of it.
Yeah.
It wasn't. In 2000.
Yeah,
Right.
So we're talking 20 years later. So, yeah.
20 years later, and caucus night, it's not over.
Not over.
All right, now let's see if we can make some sense out of this. I don't know if we can or not. We're going to start off by talking about the Republican caucus.
Good.
There's still people because
Start there,
because
he
we
said.
can wrap up.
Let's keep
Republican
talking about
caucus.
that.
There's still people that said they didn't know that they were caucusing last night. Which is hard to believe.
It's tough because there's so much attention placed on Democrats.
Right.
That Republicans sometimes can miss. If you're not a party activist and involved, you kind of got to know they're going on. So last night, about 28,000 Iowa Republicans caucus. I was in Ankeny.
How many did you have at yours?
In my precinct, we had 61 votes. I think there's about 1,000 people in the Ankeny school that
did
caucus.
that surprise you number-wise?
I thought it was good. I mean,
Okay.
I don't really know what's good, what's bad. But we had.
Well, by comparison, we talked about
Yeah.
this just before. In 2012, when Obama was on the ballot running for re-election,
Right.
similar to Trump, he had 25,000. So it's comparable.
And I want to give the Trump campaign a little props. They sent a lot of surrogates out. Laura Trump was at our precinct or our caucus location.
Really?
There were surrogates all throughout kind of central Iowa and bigger caucus sites. It's kind of nice. I think the activists really appreciate it that, he didn't have to do that. He could have just taken whatever number you get and been fine with it. But they actually put some effort into this. And I think that helps the activists kind of get charged up for this general election.
Right. Now, we were checking out both the Republican and Democratic caucus last night. We went to both areas just to get a feel for what it was like and see if the numbers are similar to you. We had two precincts over at Clay Township. The Clay Elementary School, Clay Township. I had everybody voted for Trump in that one, and then the other one, Altoona 4, had 28 for Trump, 2 for Weld.
So we had, very similar. We had Bill Weld and Joel Walsh at our
How you doing?
At our location last night.
The candidates.
Yeah. They were after they spoke.
Really?
Yeah. After they spoke, I was down working my table. After they spoke, though, I could hear chants for 4 more years. So it wasn't a real nice welcome.
Anybody over in Ankeny?
But in my precinct, we had 61 votes, 57 Trump, 2 Weld, 2 Walsh.
All right.
He's bleeding. He's leaking.
Okay. All right. So that's
and when only 61 votes from your little neighborhood show up, I'm like, I wonder who those 4 were.
I'm sure you did.
As they left.
Because in the Republican, aspect
It's a secret
of it,
ballot.
You don't know.
Yeah, it's
you
a secret
don't
ballot.
know.
Yeah.
Unlike
And
what happened
this
over on the
side of
Democratic
things.
side. Okay.
Yeah.
Democratic side, you were busy last night, so we kept an eye on.
Or not.
Yeah.
Well, I was trying to be busy.
Yeah. But what about your home precinct? How many people were at your home precinct?
There were just over 400 at my precinct, Lincoln High School.
Okay.
Which is about what we had 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And Mayor Pete won our precinct, and actually his last event was at the Roundhouse at Lincoln, where my precinct was located.
In the room.
So he did really well, and I think he did well throughout Polk County. It was, and I thought I was kind of surprised that Senator Klobuchar did as well as she did throughout Polk County. She was viable in a lot of places, and remember, we talked about the polling. She was in double digits, but not quite at that 15%. But she broke through 15% to get delegates in a number of precincts. I think she probably had a strong night last night. Obviously we haven't seen results yet, but just by watching the speeches that were given last night, sure felt like Pete Buttigieg had good information when he gave his speech, because that was a victory speech. Bernie Sanders had a little wind in his sails when he spoke. Klobuchar, I think, was smart to come out early. She was the first
Yeah.
speaker.
I declared her the winner. Just because she spoke
Because
first.
she spoke first.
Yes.
Yeah, and had a
No,
good night.
Speaking of that, we're talking about some of the results that we experienced last night and were able to observe last night. Klobuchar won the first round of when you
In Clay?
no, over in Altoona, just
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay, over there. It's Clay Township.
Yep.
Okay, she won the first one. Pete was second. Biden was third, Warren was fourth, and Bernie did not make viability status at the very beginning.
It's that ritzy neighborhood you live in.
Yeah. And then finally, was able to pick up one of Yang and come over.
They don't like socialism.
But here's what. But when it was all done, the numbers changed a little bit. Jeff, I want you to explain how that
Yep.
worked, because some people didn't understand. Say, hey, you know how many representatives are in each group, but then the numbers changed before the very end because you had to group up in the top three. Is that how it works?
Well,
Just over
it's
15 viability.
whoever's over 15%, and so that's kind of the big deal in caucus math is if you don't have 15%, you get 0, right? So that's a big penalty for not getting 15% because if you get 15%, you're guaranteed a delegate.
Okay.
If you get 13% of everybody who shows up, you get 0.
Zero.
So it's a huge penalty. Now, what we saw happen in a bunch of places is if you were really close, sometimes people would join just so you'd get that delegate. Sounds like that's what happened with Sanders.
Yeah, that's what happened
In
in the first round. But then they went over and they broke it down further. And when the final numbers came out, Mayor Pete was on top. There was like 72 people at the place over on the east side. He had 24. Klobuchar had 22, and Biden had 18. So that was the way it shook down there.
So did Sanders not get a delegate?
No, it doesn't look like it. They said they had to get from what the results I have here, they had to move some people over. Some people decided to walk away.
Yes.
And that didn't happen, and so they didn't get that number then.
Right. Yeah. That's an option, and it happens. I saw it happen in 2016. A lot of O'Malley people in 2016 that weren't viable
They leave.
They said, "Look, I'm for O'Malley. I don't want to pick anybody else."
And for a second here, when that happens, then you start to question math, okay? Because like I have the first total, I know everyone who's in my room, right? And so
Right.
we have this tendency of, well, it needs to match. Then we reshuffle the deck a little bit. Everyone who was at 15 stays, and then we see where these people go, and this number should equal this number. And then when it doesn't, you start questioning it. And then I think this is where the confusion can start, and you can, problems can go
and
from
this
there.
and this is
hard to double-check math and
it's-
people walk out of the
It's a
room.
really good point because the reality is you would like to think that the initial number and the final number are going to
Match.
be exactly the same,
same, right.
And I think, and I don't know exactly what happened last night, but I think the Iowa Democratic Party, because for the first time ever they were forced by the DNC to report the raw vote on first alignment, the raw vote on that realignment, which you just talked about, plus the state delegate equivalents. We've only ever reported the delegates in the past.
Okay.
And part of the reason why that system was simple and in many ways better is because what if somebody leaves?
Yep.
And
Right.
then the numbers don't match up exactly. Well, does that mean that there's something nefarious going on in the precinct? Nope. It just means that somebody really wanted to be for Andrew Yang or Tom Steyer,
Right.
and when
They're
their
not gonna play the
candidate
game.
wasn't viable, they just felt like they didn't want to make a choice, and they didn't want to wait around 2.5 hours for somebody they didn't
they
love.
left.
So you leave. Now, when you're trying to match up all these numbers and you have 2,600 reporters from around the country and around the world, like wanting to inspect everything, that gets tough. And if we would have just been able to report the state delegate equivalents, I think we would have known by 10 or 11 o'clock last night who won. Probably it was a close election. We'll find out
Right.
probably today. But that's what made it hard is these three numbers that we were required to report. We've never done that before. And the reality is that some people leave and then it makes it difficult. So they do have cards. They have a
There's a
paper
paper
record
trail.
now. So worst case scenario, they go back to the paper trail and we figure this out. But I do think it was a tough decision for the party last night to say, we're not going to release numbers. But it is better, frankly, than what happened in the past when you released results that are not right. And then you have to come back a couple days later and say, yeah, the guy we said won didn't really win.
So I had some experience with this. So in 2008, I ran the Republican caucuses statewide.
Okay.
And so, you build all these systems and results are coming in, and you create an algorithm to flag any precinct that has a vote total that doesn't seem in line with historical precinct performance in a caucus, right? And so it's 2008, we think, well, if we build our system to reflect 1999 and all this stuff, we should be fine. Well, every precinct that night when the first results come in are flagged because turnout is way up, okay? And then we're seeing Mike Huckabee winning caucuses and just kind of unbelievable numbers. And so what do you do at the state party? You don't release. So we had a valve. We're not releasing these results yet. I'm calling the precinct. Is this right? Mike Huckabee got 60% of your precinct. Yes, it's, and they would be mad at you. Yes, it's right. And then you start going through this and you're like, then you have to change your algorithm a little bit. Yeah, these are flagged, but this is consistent with what I'm seeing, right?
Right.
So in the midst of all that going on, Rudy Giuliani is running, right?
Yeah.
And in Cedar Rapids, someone on the phone system hit 4 times. Instead of 3 votes, 3,333. Well, I'm watching all these big numbers go by, and I send it through. And then at the media center downtown, it shows here comes Rudy. Boom, 3,000 votes. My phone lights up from our executive director.
Oh my goodness!
It's like, what? And I'm like, and I look back and I'm like, oh, it's 3,333.
I don't think he got 3,000 votes statewide.
He didn't. So I call the precinct and I'm like, what's the number? And then it's even worse because again, we release this result. The media is starting to write, here comes Rudy, and you're like, what are we gonna do? And then, I go back in there and I'm like, no, it's actually 3. And then this vote total in that media center plummets.
Yeah.
And then the media starts calling me. They're like, well, what did you do? And then the lawyers start calling you and say, how did this happen? Then you lay out your
Explain
paper.
it.
So there's a lot going on caucus night for these party people. But you got to have checks and balances in place. And sometimes you got to make gut calls on whether you're releasing information or not.
Well, and here's the bottom line on this. We watched a bunch of caucuses live, because we had cameras in a lot of these places. They were run well. Those meetings were run well. This is a volunteer operation. We had thousands of volunteers doing a great job last night. The reporting system didn't work, but that doesn't mean that the caucuses didn't work, right? It was a great process. There were thousands of people that registered that night. It was a good overall process. We just haven't had the numbers yet, and that's what we got to keep in mind.
Do you think what happened yesterday will affect our first in the nation status?
Well, look, the knives have been out for Iowa for decades. This is going to add fuel to the fire. You can always get 48 states to agree that Iowa and New Hampshire should not go first.
You can't get agreement on who goes first.
You can't get an agreement on who should take our place. So that's been our saving grace. We got to get it right. We got to release these numbers, and then we got to deal with it after.
Okay, so we'll get numbers here before it's over later on today. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Now go get some rest. Okay, it's 8:22.